just the light you need. When balance slays the demon, you find peace. In the end, it's never just the dark you seek. When balance slays the demon, you find peace.
Screaming, mute darkness, descend on this frail frame. I drown in fathomless black space. Light never scratched the depths of this domain. I see not, yet nothing could be worse than the shades my mind calls hear it. Alone at my own wake, the unraveling of reason's scheme.
I thought I'd start with something a little bit different. That is from Alan Wake, the DLC, which I think is called Alan Wake's American Nightmare. And got some recent news about the Alan Wake franchise. Remedy, the developers and creators of Alan Wake, have just got the rights back. So that could actually mean that there could be in the future an Alan Wake sequel. The game itself, although it came out in 2010, I do find it quite unusual. And if you look at it nowadays, because you can, for a while it was off Steam, but now they've got it back because they've got the rights back. It is a fascinating game and one you should try at least a little bit, because the mechanics are very unusual and quite new even today. But this is quite an unusual episode in itself as well. I'm talking about something that happened that I teased on Facebook the other day. But this is mainly about what happened and stuff like that. But basically, just to kick it off, it's since I was like a small kid, I think most boys especially, wanted to make a sword. And it's something I've always wanted to do. And so I've just finished my master's degree. And I wanted to celebrate it in a sort of different way. Also, it's been a pretty bad year for me this year, so I wanted something positive. And the lady who was there said, the sort of making the sword, it can be seen as a turning point in your life, and hopefully that is true of me. But anyway, I was looking around and I saw this course to do a Bronze Age sword, and it was all in the middle of Wales, and this tiny little forging you're making. I didn't realise how big it would turn out to be, but this Bronze Age sword over 2 days. So if you arrived on the Friday night, left on the Sunday afternoon. And so I thought, what the hell, let's just do it. Let's have a go and see how it turns out. And got a lot to talk about, but I'm really pleased with how it turned out, the actual sword, and hopefully I would like to use the sword in a film, maybe one day. But at least it's something, very unusual, because you can buy replica swords quite easily, quite cheaply. But there's nothing personal attached to it, where this is something I physically made myself. And so, like I said, it was based in Wales, so southern Wales. If you know the UK at all, it's sort of a little bit up from Cardiff, and the closest sort of major town would be Hereford. So it took ages to get there, just to get from where I am down to Wales. And then from there we had to go in these really crazy winding roads, valleys in the middle of nowhere, getting lost quite a lot. And eventually we found it. It was up on a hill. And even to get to the actual place where it was, it's crazy, absolutely crazy, because you go up this hill, you think, oh yeah, the roads aren't going to get any smaller, but then you go onto the farm tracks, which are gated off, and that was for about 3-4 miles. These sort of tracks that are tiny and more suited to a 4x4 than the actual car I had. But actually, I arrived early, which is crazy, because like I said, I've been driving from about 10 in the morning, and got lost for a quite big chunk of that. But it's quite interesting. And it actually felt like you were going very much off the beaten track. It's like most people, if they live in the city and go to the countryside, it's quite unusual. But if you go one step further than that, and you go somewhere that hasn't really been built on, or there hasn't been people around for quite a long time, you have like 6 people in a couple of miles. That's how rural it was. So it felt quite interesting and different. And again, it's a sort of place where if you didn't know what the time was, or you didn't know what the date was, you just wouldn't know. The days would sort of blend together. Well, I think that's a good, before we get into it properly, that's a good place to play another track. And this is from Half-Life 2, which I am ashamed that I've only just played. Even though I've had it in my Steam library for years, I haven't got around to playing it. Because on this channel, I started playing the original Half-Life, and I really struggled with it. I really didn't enjoy it because of the controls, how finicky it was. Especially when they had parkour sort of traps and areas in the game. I really struggled with that, and I got really frustrated, so I stopped after a while. But Half-Life 2, it is no wonder people still think it's one of the best FPS games ever made, because it's just so good. The combat's so good, the movement, the interaction is so good, and it still holds up today. Unfortunately, there is probably never going to be a Half-Life 3, unless they do a 180 and like they set it 20 years later and it came out 20 years later, so 2024. But still an amazing achievement, and a game that, just like Alan Wake, you can pick up and play now and it still feels and runs quite great. Yeah, so let's actually get into it. So the first night, it was just a meet and greet, really, and seeing all everybody who was involved, and the food again was, because I'd been out all day, was fantastic. It was the guy who run it, he had a wife who was Hungarian, and so it was Hungarian based, so like basically meatballs and rice basically, but it was really nice to come into because it was quite cold up in the hills and in Wales, and it'd been chucking it down all day, so that was great. And it's great to meet all these different people and try and understand why. I don't know if you expect this or not, there wasn't many women going, it was mainly men. The women who went were generally couples, but they seemed just interested in doing it as well. And the house itself, like I said, it's in this valley, in this Welsh valley, deep, like, takes you about 20 minutes to actually get to it. But the house, I really like the house because originally it was 15th century, so like a farmer's sort of house. But someone about 15 years ago adapted it, so it was looks more something like a Canadian, Scandinavian, American rather than British, because it had a lot of wood facing and big windows, big French windows basically. And again, because of where we were, it was quite quiet and quite unusual. You actually got to see the stars at night, which generally where I am, it's quite tricky to see that. And so we saw the International Space Center or Station and the North Star as well, I think, that night. Didn't see much because it'd been raining on and off. But the actual and then basically we just went to bed because most people were knackered after driving there. Some people actually couldn't turn up. They were a bit late, so they'd turn up on the Saturday morning. But it had a really nice atmosphere and everything. Everyone seemed to be really enjoying it, which was the main thing, really. So I think that's I'm going to break it up in days, really, I think. So that's a good place to go into the next song. And this is from Rome. I've got a list with me next to why I keep on bobbing my head occasionally. But this is from one of my favourite games of all time. It's one of the first games I ever played. And that is Rome Total War. Nowadays it does look very, the graphics aren't amazing and the character models are all the same. But I spent loads of hours in this game. I loved it. It's still quite playable today if you can put up with the graphics. You think they're quite cartoony looking, really. But the main element I love is the idea as you're building up, you could actually look what your city looked like on the battle map, so you could tour around and see what the new buildings were. And I spent hours just doing that. At the moment, I'm currently starting to do ambience tracks because I love ambient music in terms of game music, and so I've started doing that for Rome Total War. I'm not doing quite a lot of them, just 3 really, which is going to be the Greeks, the Romans, and then the barbarians. So I'm really looking forward to having them on the channel. So the actual day arrived when we're actually making stuff, and the actual casting didn't take that long because instead of traditional what we think of when you're making a sword is you keep on heating it up and hammering it. But that's for iron stuff. With bronze, it's a little bit different. You're just casting it. You've got to get it to a certain temperature, which is quite hot, so it's bubbling away. And you've got to mix it together with tin, the right amount of tin, because if you add too much, it gets too brittle, so it'll break up in your hands. And if you add too little tin, basically your sword will become incredibly bendy, so you couldn't really use it for hitting people. So yeah, we spent crazy to think about. Really, it only took about half an hour to do the casting and the pouring of each sword, because all they had to do was basically using a gas furnace and heating it up and then pouring it into these stone molds. And I was shocked. I thought it'd take like an hour or two for it to cool down or to become solid, but literally it took seconds and the swords were ready. And from then on, the whole day pretty much was trying to get rid of the blemishes and the stone marks and making it nice and shiny. Getting towards shiny, sort of getting the rough edge off, which took all day. But quite enjoyable, and I seemed to be the slowest. But it was also that night that I got to have a little look around the actual site. It's quite unusual. This guy, over the last 15 years roughly, has been building all sorts there that no one would know if they saw it at a distance. So, for example, there was a yurt tucked away in a corner, and then a big octagonal building, which is like a summer house, which was enormous, bigger than my garden pretty much. And then there was a big roundhouse that I'm going to come to later. 2 streams came through the property. You had a big viewing porch and then a big pond with a statue in it, a Greek statue. And finally, which I never saw, I tried to look for it but I couldn't find, but he's... when you think about it, it's crazy. He's building a medieval tower down in the garden, which is going to be enormous. And it's all made out of wood, and it's sort of medieval sort of techniques. So it's going to be really interesting to see how it turns out. But that evening, it was the opportunity to go into the roundhouse. Like I said, he basically built it himself with a couple of friends, and it was a thatched sort of roof. And it was chucking it down that night, but there was no rain actually entered the building itself, which was crazy to think about. It was quite snug in there because they lit a fire and it was quite dark. And because it was based around the Bronze Age, the guy running the course wanted to read a little bit from the Iliad, which is the Trojan War and stuff about Achilles and stuff like that. So that was quite interesting. I zoned out really. I wasn't really listening to the words spoken really. I was just getting into the atmosphere, enjoying. It's always good to be around a fire at night. It's really a great feeling. And if I could, I would have spent all night in there because, like I said, it was so dry in there, so warm, even though the door was open. It does show that even though people think the Celts are a bit inferior and stuff like that, the building methods lasted for quite a long time, especially the roundhouse. In the UK, especially, square buildings only sort of came with the Romans. And if you think about it, it's probably harder to build something round rather than square or rectangular. But moving on to the next song, this is quite topical. Recently, Destiny 2 has just gone free to play on Steam. I find it quite interesting that that's happening, and it's going to make Warframe have a run for its money. I've been trying to install it, but I've run into problems, so I might install it eventually one day, because there is loads of content and quite good content, and it will last you for like hundreds of hours probably. But this is the theme from their latest update. So, the following day, each day pretty much I got sore and sore because of the work I was doing and standing up all day. But the final day really was just polishing the sword. So with that, instead of using files, which I had been using the day before, it makes quite a lot of scratches in the metal. The idea was using sandpaper at different grains to sort of make everything even, and sort of trick the eye to believe there wasn't any scratches at all on the blade itself. It was also then that they were doing the handles as well. So the handles were made out of oak, and they were sort of sanded together. That was the last thing to do, and then coated with linseed oil to darken it and protect the wood as well. But like I said, all day pretty much to do the sandpaper, and that, just like the filing really, was getting it so it was getting shinier and shinier and smoother the metal, so it would become what most people think of bronze and a bronze sword. So with that, I started with quite a lot of different grades of dry sandpaper, which is quite rough and coarse, just going up and down for hour after hour until it was pretty much getting there. And then I started on the wet sandpaper, so that was quite a lot of wet, different grades, really fine grades. And so I went over it a couple of times and then went up and then went down. Again, that took all day. And then it was resembling it closely to how I wanted it. Personally, I would have spent more time in it. It's like I was meant to sharpen the sword at the end, and I only just got started really. I did about half an hour. I could have done more. But what I found was really interesting was how, even after all that work, just a little bit of brasso covering the blade just made the blade completely different, and it hid a lot of the scratches as well. So brasso is the main thing really to use with covering up big scratches and stuff in bronze. A lot of people obviously were sick of polishing. That's what they said. They wouldn't really want to file or polish again. But it really felt like you were doing something, you were involved heavily in the creation of this sword. And so it's something personal, so you can point out where the scratches are that make your sword yours. Same with the handle and how it fits in your hand. Now we're moving on towards some of the last songs, and this is one from one of my favourite games really, and this is from Splinter Cell Chaos Theory, which is a game people think is probably the best in the series for Splinter Cell, but I would like to do a podcast on it one day. But the actual soundtrack for the game is very, very unusual, especially for a stealth game, and it's sort of very, like I said, very unusual. So it stands the test of time and makes the game doesn't age as much because of how unusual the soundtrack is. It's sort of, like I said, it's sort of experimental electronic music really, but I hope you enjoy it. So to actually round off, would I recommend doing it? I think if you like I wanted to mark a milestone in my life. I think that's a really good way to do it. Also, like I said, most people as they're growing up were wanting a sword as well. So I'll put the link to the actual course in the description. And it was crazy what we got for the money. So it wasn't really cheap. It wasn't too expensive. It was in the middle. But it was a really enjoyable time. It felt like I said, it was working towards something, and I'm really pleased with the outcome of it. Also, it seems everybody got on with each other, and the food, like I said, was great, and just the atmosphere was great. There was a lot of work involved, quite long hours, but the reward was quite good from that. When I compare it to the shield I made a couple of weeks ago, it's about the same level of work. It just wasn't spaced out as much. So I did my shield over 4 days, and I think if I'd done that with the sword, it would have been a lot easier to sort of manage the amount of work towards doing the sword. But yeah, if you like I said, if you're interested, please have a look and support the guy who's doing it. It's very there's only a few people that can do this sort of thing nowadays, especially making swords in the UK. And it was something very, very fun. So if you enjoy my content, please comment down below and like my videos. That would mean a lot. Please let me know what you think about the idea of making a Bronze Age swords, and if you wanted to do it as well. And also, if you really want me to use it in a film as well, that would be fantastic. So thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.